welcome everybody to today's webinar, highlight of my week, where I get to pretend like, I have friends again and I'm interacting with human beings. So today we're going to talk about the topic of sewing for the body that you have. And really, I was chatting with Carrie and Ayala, who are the other two Cashmerettes, and we were kind of trying to think about topics people will be interested in. And we felt that there's so much to talk about when it comes to sewing and your body and body confidence and how you can try and feel, at the very least neutral about yourself, if not good about yourself. And I have a lot of opinions on the topic. So we thought that today we would go through that. And really it's the fundamental concept is that you deserve to sew for the body you have today. So I think if you're like me, for a very, very long time, I certainly didn't buy clothes because I was like, in X period of time, in 6 months time or in a year's time or whatever, I'm going to look right. And when I get then I'll buy the clothes, right? Or then I'll sew the clothes. And what I discovered over time was that all I was doing was making myself feel bad. Right? All I was doing was compounding the fact that I didn't feel great about my appearance with, in addition, not wearing nice clothes. And fundamentally, if you have lovely fabric, it's much better that it's on your body than in your cupboard, right? Like, how long is your fabric going to stay in your cupboard until the day that you suddenly think, I deserve this? So really the fundamental idea behind today is just thinking about what we can do to make you feel good about sewing for the body that you have now and not putting it off. And there are, real considerations, things like your weight fluctuating. So we're going to talk about that. There is a whole, mentality around it. I'm going to talk about that. And I'm going to give you also some really really advice on how to set yourself up for success. So if you're not feeling great right now, and you think, oh, I think sewing might actually make it worse, like thinking about clothes, I have some really tangible suggestions for approaches you can take. So I'm going to take you through basically these 5 main ideas and talk about them, but I'm also very happy to take questions. So you can ask questions in the chat. So if you click chat, it's just down, mine is flashing. I don't know if everyone else's flashes the whole time. You can ask questions there and Carrie is going to keep a note of them. And at the end of each point that I talk about, we're going to see if there's questions, and you can either just ask them there, or if you want to, we can unmute you and you can ask it live to everyone. I'm sure everyone would like that, actually. It's kind of a nice thing to see. The one caveat that I would say on that is that, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, actually, we all have to be really careful about how we talk about ourselves and how we talk about our bodies. And so if you are going to ask a question that's specific about yourself, I don't want to hear negativity about it, okay? You've got to think about, how am I going to frame this that it's something that we can kind of work on together, as opposed to oh, I don't like what I look like. And I will get to that in a minute, actually, specifically what I mean by that. I did want to start by giving you sort of a little bit of personal history of mine. If you followed Cashmerette for a while, you'll have heard this already, so I apologize, because between the blog and podcasts and all those kind of things, I have talked about things. But basically, I was always on the bigger side my entire life. Quite a few people in my family are big, not all, not everybody, but some people. And I was probably, destined to be on the bigger size. Of course, as most of you have, I probably I look back on my 15-year-old self who thought she was the size of a house. And I'm like, oh, wow, I'd be pretty slim if I was that size today. But the reality is that it's, it's a mental thing, right? Your feelings about what you look like. So for many years, I loved the idea of clothes and I had all these ideas about what I'd like to wear, but I simply couldn't find those clothes in my size, especially, 20, 30 years ago, you really, really couldn't find anything in your size. And I sort of resigned myself to, always wearing wrap dresses with a camisole underneath, because I figured that would, that's what I could do. And then learning to sew was really actually a turning point for me, but it wasn't quite as simple as I learned to sew and then everything was better. So I always did creative things, I did lots of sewing, I did photography, I did drawing and things like that. I forget all those now. I have a small child, can never do anything like that ever again for a long time. But sewing was on my list. And one day I decided to take a sewing class, and suddenly something shifted in my head, because I was like, hold on. Theoretically, if I could sew clothes, and I remember thinking, I'll never be able to sew like a t-shirt though. That would be too much. But maybe an elastic waist skirt, like maybe I could do that. And I was like, I wonder if I can make things fit me. And at this point, I hadn't even discovered that you could grade between sizes, and I didn't know what a full bust adjustment was. But it just had this little idea. So I got very, very into it. And unfortunately, pretty rapidly, I discovered, oh, the patterns don't come in my size either. I learned the first thing I made was out of a book, and I was probably 2 sizes bigger than the biggest size in the book, but I just made that size. And then I kind of had the familiar experience of like, oh, this doesn't fit me again, right? Like I thought the whole point of sewing was that it would. And so over time, I learned how to adjust patterns, and definitely doing my first full bust adjustment, I was like, oh, this is interesting. And then I started realizing things as I was doing it. I was like, seems like a lot of people have to adjust patterns. Maybe not just me. Okay, that's kind of interesting. And then I would look at the sizes on the side of the pattern pieces, and you'd be like, I like really beat myself up that I'm on that line and not that line, but they're like this far apart. So maybe my perception of what I look like is maybe a little bit off. And then I also started following other plus size bloggers and people who sew. And I was like, that's not, I don't think I look like that, but they just said their measurements and maybe I do. And so I started having all these little kind of realizations. Eventually what it led to is Cashmerette, because I realized that, you know, the average American woman is a size 14, 16, about what I am, and has big boobs, right? More women, plus size women, are an H than a B. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, maybe I should do something about that and actually try and do it myself. So that is where Cashmerette Patterns came from. But even before then, it was already starting to change the way I thought about myself, because instead of having to try on clothes all the time that didn't fit me, which even now having to go and buy something in the store is like, it's awful, right? Like I have to explain to my smaller friends, like there's a mall in the center of Boston, the Prudential Center Mall. And I don't know how many clothes shops it has in it, maybe like 15, 20. I don't fit in any of them. Like there are 20 stores and I don't fit in any of them. And I'm not even very plus size, right? Like I'm small plus size. So all of a sudden, like the liberation of never trying on clothes anymore, like I never try them on anymore, is phenomenal. And the reality is we almost all are different sizes at different points in our body. So even if, you know, I think, oh, wow, this place has a thing that fits my boobs, there's no way it'll fit my hips. My hips are like 3 sizes smaller than my boobs. So that for me was very, very liberating. And then ultimately now, you know, I am like deep into the plus size world. To me, if I see a straight size sewing pattern, I think that looks really weird. Is that for like a doll or something? Because I'm just so familiar with looking at plus size pattern pieces. So I'm really, really, really in it. But obviously not everyone's going to be. Like not everyone, it's your job, right? So I want to share a couple of thoughts and big ideas that I have found have made a really big difference. So let us have a look at the first one. So the first idea that I want you to take on, and by the way, if you're seeing the people flipping over the text, you can drag the screen down. The first basic idea is that your body cannot be wrong. And the reason I say this is I've taught lots of in-person classes, and there are so many people who tell me in one way or another that their body is wrong, right? Whether that's because it's different than it used to be, whether that's because they can't find clothes in stores, whether that's because they can't sew something that fits them so far, like they haven't figured it out. And they will tell me they're wrong. I actually had one person once tell me they were impossible. They said, I have an impossible body. To which my answer was, well, you appear to be a functioning human being. You know, you're talking to me, you're at a sewing class. It cannot be impossible. But I understood what she meant. What she meant was like, it's impossible to get things to fit me. And this is one of the most fundamentally freeing things about sewing, which is if the garment doesn't fit, the garment is wrong and needs to change and not you. And that is like such a shift. But if you can get that in your head, it changes everything. right? So think about it. If you try and put a sleeve on and it doesn't fit and it's really tight and you're like, most people will say, oh no, my arm is too big for this. But it isn't, right? Actually, the sleeve is too small for your arm. Your arm is what it is. Your arm is you. It's totally fine. Doesn't matter what size your arm is. Could be a tiny twig, could be enormous. Doesn't matter. All that matters is, does the clothes fit you? And here's the thing. Can you change your body? I mean, I think the jury's out a bit on that, right? We all know that like about 95% of people who lose weight put it back on in the period of 5 years. So maybe, but it's really hard and it takes ages and it tends to screw your mind up a little bit. But you can change a sleeve really easily. You do a full bicep adjustment or make a different size and you put it on and it fits your arm. And so this is a fundamental thing that you need to get in your brain. And even now, you know, I have to watch myself. I give this little talk at the beginning of all my classes. And even then I find myself sometimes saying like, oh, but the thing is, you know, like my boobs are so not, it's like, hold on, no. Anything can fit my boobs if I make it fit my boobs. It's the garment that needs to change. It's the garment that has the problem. It's the pattern that's the issue. It's never your body. Your body is totally fine. Trust me, anyone of literally any size, the smallest person in the world and the biggest person in the world, you can make anything fit, right? I can make an Appleton for anybody. Absolutely anybody. You have 3 arms, no problem. We'll put a 3rd sleeve on there, right? It could never be your body. Your body can never be the reason that something can't fit. So it's really about reframing your language. So thinking about how you talk about yourself, right? Now this is a tricky one because some people are like, it's too much to ask me to be positive about my body, right? It's too much to say like, you know, I have to like love myself and think I'm super gorgeous. And that's fair enough. You know, like we're constantly surrounded by messages telling us that if we don't look a certain way, we're not. And it's hard, you know, like not everyone is going to feel like super great about themselves all the time. But first of all, at the very least, you could aspire to feel neutral. Okay? It's the body that you have. It's the body you have now. It might change, but you could at least feel neutral about it. And then not blame it for when a garment doesn't fit you. And again, see, I caught myself there. I was about to say when you don't fit a garment. No. It's not you. It's, does the garment fit you? Don't blame yourself when a garment doesn't fit you. An interesting little side anecdote here. I used to work for Procter & Gamble, who owned Gillette, and I worked on Gillette Venus for a while. And someone once told me, one of the researchers, they do all this research, right, with the women shaving their legs and the men shaving their face. And they said, this is a fascinating fact. When women cut themselves shaving, overwhelmingly, they say in the like report that they have to write, oh, I was so silly. I held it at the wrong angle. I nicked myself. Like, I'm sorry, I cut myself. And overwhelmingly, when the men cut their faces, they went, something was wrong with this razor. You need to change this, like, because there's something, you know, about it that meant that I cut myself. Now that's like wildly stereotypical, obviously, right? So like it doesn't apply to everyone, but I thought the mindset is so interesting, right? That the women had all jumped to, I did something wrong, like I'm really sorry. And the men all jumped to like, there's something wrong with this tool. And we need to think about it in the same way, whatever gender expression you have, right? It's the pattern or it's the clothes that don't fit you and not the other way around. So as you, just keep it at the back of your mind. And as you think and as you talk about yourself, you'll catch yourself doing it. I even do now. But really, it's quite profound if you can take it on, because it's a really big shift in your attitude towards yourself. Okay, before I go on to the next point, Carrie, did we have any questions or comments from anybody?
Lots of positive comments, no specific questions yet.
All right, no worries. So I wanted to share with you the second one. So the second idea is all about curating your visual inspiration. So Lindy West, who's this really cool author who wrote Shrill, which is like a TV show now on Hulu, and has had various other articles and so on, said that the most radical thing that you can do as a fat woman, and that's how she describes herself, I describe myself, you don't have to, it's fine, is to look at pictures of fat women until it means nothing to you, until you're just like, cool, You don't have any critical thoughts. You don't have anything negative. You just think like, yeah, great, women. And I can tell you right now that that happened to me. So even before I set up Cashmerette, I decided that I was going to start looking way more at images of plus size women. And it was kind of two things. It was plus size sewists, but also just style and fashion people. And I remember very specifically a moment where something changed in my brain. So I was following this woman called Gabby Gregg, who used to have a website, a blog called Young, Fat and Fabulous. And then she changed it to Gabby Fresh at some point. So she's Gabby Fresh now. And she was a bit younger than me. She was bigger than me, although actually now I'm the same size as her. But at the time, she was bigger than me. And I saw this picture of her wearing the kind of outfit that I'd always aspired to wear. And I just thought, wow, she looks awesome. And I don't know why, but something clicked in my head then, because I was like, hold on. This woman is 2 or 3 sizes bigger than me. She looks awesome, like totally great. Nothing in my brain is going like, oh, look at that, or look at that, which, you know, I did to myself. And I was like, literally, if she could look like that, so can I. Like, there's no reason that I couldn't look awesome wearing those clothes. And in fact, I ended up buying like everything that she was wearing in that outfit. And something really shifted. And it makes such a difference, because I used to read a lot of fashion magazines. I used to just like take in a lot of visual input of people who are much, much, much smaller than me. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to make more of an effort. And what is amazing is it normalizes how you feel about yourself in relation to the population. Now, not everyone is average. I am like truly an average size. So for me, I see loads of people now, loads, who look about the same size as me. I will say previously, I was always the biggest friend. I always felt like the biggest person in the room. I probably wasn't, but I felt like it. And it makes such a difference in reframing in your brain what average people look like. And also seeing like people that you could look like. So if you're like, oh, I could never wear a leather jacket, or oh, I would really love to wear a bikini, but I couldn't wear one. Nothing is better than looking at pictures of fat women in bikinis if you want to feel good about wearing a bikini. Right? Like, there is just nothing to compare to it. So if you are on social media, it's something to really consider. Like, find people to follow, and there are all kinds. You can have a look at like who we follow on Instagram, but also go on like the Curvy Sewing Collective. I'm going to show you some ideas in a second. There are huge numbers of people. The diversity level is like so. It's not fantastic, because social media tends to trend in like certain age groups, for instance. But there are tons of inspirational people, and it really, really helps, especially in the long term. One thing you can do is follow hashtags, and that really helps. So for instance, Curvy Sewing and CSC Makes, which is Curvy Sewing Collective Makes, will let you see women who've like tagged themselves as being basically curvy or plus size. There's also a hashtag, it was big, I don't know, like last year, but it's still around, called the measurements movement. Now, this one is sort of like a optional thing, right? Like, don't feel like you have to look at this. But what it was, is people were saying, people have no idea what measurements other people are. And when they compare themselves, they're totally out of whack. So, for instance, I myself am 48 inches full bust when I'm not breastfeeding, about 51 when I am breastfeeding. My waist is somewhere on a very good day is like 40 and a half. Most of the time it's probably about 42. And if I sit down, it can be like 44. And my hips are always about 46 or 47. Just the way I'm distributed, my hips are always on the smaller side. So that's what I am. I have had many women, and I'm pretty open about that. I've had many women say to me, what? No, but I'm the same as that. Like, I'm very similar, but I thought I was much bigger than you. And then, because people don't tend to be very straightforward about it. So what happened is a few people set up this little hashtag called measurements movement, where people say what their measurements are. So the format that they use is they'll be like B48, W42, H46, right? Bust, waist, hip. And one cool thing about that is that you can look for people who have the same measurements as you. Now, it doesn't mean you'll look exactly the same, right? Like if you were on my picking a size webinar a few weeks ago, you know, a 48-inch bust, you could be a bigger person with an A-cup bust or a smaller person with an H-cup bust. So it doesn't mean you're definitely going to look identical to them, but it does do two things. First of all, it gives you a rough idea of what a pattern will look like on someone who's your size. And second of all, it really helps this recalibration in your brain, right? Like, especially if you aren't feeling very confident about fashion, or you're not feeling very confident about yourself, it can be so helpful to see these images. On Cashmerette, when we launch patterns now, we include the sizes, the measurements of our models in the blog post, so you can go and see. And we try as much as we can to have a variety of body sizes. We have many restrictions on us that make it a little bit hard. Like in an ideal world, I would love to show every pattern on every size, but we can't do that. But between our launch photography and then this new, the new thing we're doing with fabric shops, where we work with them and have a bunch of people try things out, means that we are able now to show people of all different sizes. And the measurements help, because again, sometimes people say, well, that person's, you know, really different than me, and then they discover that they're not. I wanted to share, this is just 3 examples, but we have Kenna for Cashmerette, which makes it sound like a supermodel, which I thoroughly approve of. So this is Kenna, who lives in LA, and she made the Dartmouth top, and she is in our size 32. So if you're in our size 32 and you're like, what would I look like in that? You would look pretty similar to Kenna. So, you know, that's an example of like a real sewist. She's not a model, although she's gorgeous. She could be a model, but she's not. Someone to follow. Then you actually have, you know, plus size fashion influencer type people. So Girl with Curves is this woman who is like super good looking. And she wears like beautiful, beautiful outfits. You know, she's on the younger side. I think she has some kids though. And I have found so much inspiration from her. I love it. Even on little styling things I wouldn't have thought of. Nicolette Mason is another like long time plus size sort of icon. She set up the line Prem with Gabby Gregg, who I mentioned a minute ago. Unfortunately, they went out of business recently, but she has done tons of things, tons of collaborations. And you can find these people usually on Instagram and on their blogs. So the 2 places that are the most popular. So yeah, so that is my second recommendation. I cannot underplay how important that was to me. I really find now that when I look at sort of regular media, I'm actually a little taken aback, and I'm like, oh, this is different, you know? And sometimes I'm like, ooh, I think that would look nicer in a bigger size, just because I'm just so exposed to people on the larger size like the entire time. So it's made a huge difference to me. And one thing I did want to mention in that context is being careful about how you describe yourself online. And that was kind of what I was getting at a minute ago with like, if you ask a question. So here's what I mean by that. Everyone has bad days, right? And like everyone has days when they're like, oh, this, right? Like, oh, I don't like this about myself. I don't like this about myself. Or like, I feel so big. The fundamental reality is there will always be someone who has more of or less of that thing than you. So what I mean is, if you are a size 18, there's lots of people who are bigger than a size 18. If you think I have big arms, there's always someone who has bigger arms, right? Always, right? Like there's one person in the world who has the biggest of all those things, and I'm gonna bet that's probably not you. Now, when it's just yourself and you're at home, it's very easy to be like, oh, I feel so bad about this, right? But you really have to watch out online. And this is one of the reasons that when we set up the Curvy Sewing Collective and Cashmerette Facebook groups, we have rules about this. And people don't like it, but they're rules and they're really important. And we say you cannot criticize your body online. And another thing linked to this, I would honestly say, is to other people, right? To like your children or other people around you. And the reason is you have no idea who's reading that, right? There will always be someone who would look at you and go, wow, I wish I looked like you. Like, and that makes them feel terrible about themselves, right? I can give you an example, and Carrie knows this one because we talked about this. There was a phase of people putting pictures of themselves in swimsuits on Instagram and talking about how brave they were, right? Now, I have put pictures of myself on a swimsuit on Instagram, and you will never see me saying I'm brave. Even if maybe I personally think I am brave, right? But I never say it. And the reason that I never say it is because there are many people who are like, if I looked like you, I would give $1 million to look like you. And so even if I am like, look at this and look at this and look at this, I know that it's not necessarily, that's my personal expression. Now, there have been many small women, right, who have the tiniest little bit of maybe like a tummy, like tiny, tiny, tiny tummy, posting on Instagram all about like, I feel so brave and so courageous to do this. Now, me and Carrie had lots of conversations about this. It is not to say that they don't feel brave. Absolutely. And I get that, maybe it was hard for them to do it, but it makes me feel terrible. I see it and I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, to me, you look like a supermodel. Like, I can't even imagine looking like that in a swimsuit. And even though, like I'm surrounded by body positive stuff all the time, I have that instinctive reaction to it. But the reality is that there's always someone bigger and smaller than you, right? It's not just that I don't particularly appreciate size 2 people with like a tiny bit of cellulite talking about how brave they are, because it makes me feel bad. Like, it always applies to everyone. And, you can have empathy for everyone. Just to be very clear, I'm not saying that these people like do not struggle to do it, but there are some realities about how society treats people as well, right? So for instance, someone who's a size 2 and has a tiny, tiny tummy is not going to be shouted at on the beach, or not have like teenage boys oinkle her or whatever. Also has the privilege of being able to buy swimsuits anywhere that they want, or being able to make every swimsuit pattern that they want. So first of all, like, it's not the same, because actually people of different sizes are treated very differently. But, it's about understanding that there are certain privileges that almost everybody has. So I want to be kind to everyone. I did not write on that person's Instagram, right? Like, how dare you say this? I'm big. I wanted to, but I didn't, obviously, right? Like, be kind. But at the same time, it was such a good reminder to myself to watch out for what I say, right? Like, it's not fair for me to criticize my body in public or to other people, and certainly not in front of my daughter now, although she's tiny, but she loves her tummy. She's like, tum, 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 tum. But the day will come when she probably doesn't do that, unfortunately. Anyway, so that is the sort of reason why when you're talking about yourself, you just have to be really careful and think about who else is listening to it and on the impact that it might have on other people. Okay. Any more questions, Carrie, or comments, or things I should?
Yeah, we've got a couple.
Yep.
Nan asked if we include models' heights in those posts. And I don't think we have recently, at least, but we can definitely add that in because that would be helpful.
I think we've inconsistently done it. So it's a good point that we should do it more regularly. I think, to be honest, a lot of our models are like around 5'6", so we tend to not think of it as like being really notable. And so it's only when they're more extreme that we do. But yeah, we should do that all the time.
Yep. And then Peggy said, shouldn't we say normal or average size rather than bigger size when we're talking about plus sizes?
The language is so hard on this, right? It's so difficult. It's like there's straight and plus size, but some people don't like that. And then, there's average to mean 14 and 16. And then I guess you could say below average. I don't like normal because I think you got to think about the opposite of everything, right? The opposite of normal is abnormal, and that I don't love that. But yeah, it's a minefield. So I apologize in advance if I say something that I shouldn't do. See, I personally have like reclaimed the word fat, and I'm okay with that. So like I would describe myself as a fat woman, and that's fine, but not everyone would. Actually, when we first set up the Curvy Sewing Collective, there was a lot of controversy about this because we had to think of a name. And some people were like, let's do Fat Sewing Collective. But there are many, many women who would find that offensive, who do not identify with that, and who, that would be really, really upsetting, and they wouldn't want to be associated with it. We thought about plus size, but some people don't like that. And so in the end, we used curvy, which is both sort of like a euphemism sometimes for plus size, but also refers to, for instance, people who have big boobs. And that's how we use it at Cashmerette. So when we talk about curves, we're normally talking about boobs, actually. But it's a very complicated one, language and reclaiming words. Everyone has their personal thing. Personally, I don't love the whole, like, I'm a fluffy mermaid Amazon or whatever, but whatever. Like, if you describe yourself as a fluffy Amazon, go you. Very quirky. All right, let's go on to the next one. So the next point is about setting yourself up for success. So we're getting more specific now, less theoretical. So here are 3 things that if you want to sew for yourself and still feel good about yourself and not have it actually be a negative thing, are really important. And somehow my house suddenly got warmer. So I'm going to take my cardigan off. Okay. So 3 things are, the first one is know your measurements. So this is a really interesting one because I think it is one of the stumbling blocks for a lot of people who come to sewing to feel better about themselves. Because they're like, I don't want to judge my body anymore. Like maybe, for instance, you don't weigh yourself anymore. I don't weigh myself anymore. I don't know what the number is, right? I know roughly where I am, but that's it. And then all of a sudden you're asking me to measure myself and write that number down. And especially, you know, if you're someone who's like rejected like dieting and rejected like tracking things, it can be a little triggering, to be perfectly honest. However, it is absolutely essential. Because the whole point of sewing your own clothes is that they fit you. And the only way you can know if something's going to fit you is if you measure yourself, right? So it's basically something you have to do if you are going to make clothes and then feel good about wearing them. So I have a couple of tips. The first one is, if you find it very difficult to look at the number on the measuring tape, use the other number. So what I mean is, if you measure yourself in inches usually, measure yourself in centimeters. If you normally measure yourself in centimeters, measure yourself in inches. I've lived in 9 countries, and so I've dealt with lots of different like units, right? So like I've lived in places where I weighed myself in stones and pounds, in kilograms, and then in pounds in America. When I first moved to America, I was like, I don't know what this number means. Like I weigh 100 and, well, that wasn't actually, I weighed 200 or something, but like I weigh like 741. I don't know. That just sounds like a number. Like I weigh 6 apples. Like, okay, right? Like it meant nothing to me. Like it had no emotion. Whereas in the UK, you know, I had numbers in my head. Like if you get over this number of stone, like that's a problem. And so I found actually like it very liberating because like I didn't care about those numbers. I'll give you an example, which is quite funny actually. You know how in America, like 200 pounds is this like number, right? Like you're under or over 200 pounds, right? Like, which whatever, 200 pounds, by the way, is not heavy. People who I think look thin weigh 200 pounds. But it's this number in the public consciousness, right? Like Oprah's like, I got to 200 pounds. That number means nothing in Europe, nothing. Because I don't even know what it is, right? Like 14 stone 9 or something, right? Like it isn't a number in the UK. It doesn't mean anything. It only means something in America because it's 200. And that just shows you how meaningless it is, right? Like we set these like bars based on like a numerical system, but you could use a different numerical system. So anyway, sorry, I went on a rant there. But use the other side of your measuring tape if you want, right? And then just basically you have to think about it as almost like you're making a recipe. So you need to know how much flour is in the cake. And you can be like, I'd like to have less flour, but like then the cake won't be good, right? You need to know what your waist measures so that the waistband fits you well. So it's incredibly important. So we have a bunch of resources on how to measure yourself on the blog, especially on where your waist is. And then also I did the whole webinar the other day, if any of you were on it, about how to measure yourself. So very important. Try and just be like cool about it and just do it because it's incredibly important. So the second point is about using patterns designed for your body size and shape. Now, I'm going to preface this with saying there are some people where there are not patterns for their body size and shape, right? Not Cashmerette and not others. And in that case, yes, if you're going to sew, you are going to have to either grade up or you're going to have to learn to draft. And you can do basic drafting fairly easily and grading up. But let's assume that if you're a size 32 or below, there are patterns available. And actually, if you want to see what patterns are available and what size, I actually have a roundup on my blog, which Carrie can provide the link for, that basically captures the biggest size of all the brands. It may not be 100% up to date. So it's possible there's 1 or 2 that are out. So if you see that, like leave it in the comments. And the good news is, after a sort of uproar last year, a lot of brands are now going bigger. But here's the thing. If you consistently try to make smaller patterns fit you, it's really rough emotionally, right? Like you go back to the whole, like I'm leaning, you know, I'm going to the back of the hangers in the store, which is what I always feel like. I'm always just like, what's your biggest size? That's what I feel like every time I go into every shop, like, what's your biggest bra? What's your biggest size? And then I see if I'm smaller than that. And often I'm not. And it's the same thing, right? So for a long time, I was trying to use straight size patterns. And when I first started, I was usually 1 to 2 sizes out of them. Now I'm like 3 sizes out of them. And, it just made me feel bad. And what happened is, obviously, when I first started, there was no Cashmerette, but there are more available now. It is so liberating to make something that's already more or less in your size. Now, it doesn't mean you won't have to adjust it, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, but it makes a fundamental difference. And second of all, if you can, again, it's all privilege, right? I'm not saying everyone can do this. They can't, unfortunately, but a lot of us can. If you can find a brand that also goes your body shape, that's even better. So for instance, Cashmerette made for big boobs, fundamentally, right? Like, that's what we do. And we're somewhere between hourglass and appley. I will say I'm a bit appley, therefore all the styles work pretty well for apples, just FYI. But we're not made for super pear shape. So if you're very pear shape, you're going to have to adjust our patterns, or you're going to have to buy versions of our patterns that doesn't really matter. So for instance, if you're very pear shaped, you can make the Upton and you're fine, because the skirt is so big, it doesn't matter, like even if your hips are bigger. So that's us. Sewaholic, who sadly have kind of gone dormant, but you can still buy their patterns. They were made for pear shapes. The only thing is, I will say, their sizing isn't good. But if you're in their sizing, then you could do that. There's a fairly new brand out now, PDF only, called Muna and Broad, and they are doing a lot of trousers, although they do have one top, I think, and they're specializing in 47 inches up. And in fact, one really cool thing about them is, if you're not in their size range, they will make the pattern in your size for free, right? They're already going up to, I think, 71-inch hip. But if you are bigger than a 71-inch hip and you email them, they will make it to you for free, which is kind of amazing. How long that goes on for, I do not know. We would not be able to financially be able to do that. But I think because they're small, they can do it. So it's Muna and Broad, M-U-N-A and B-R-O-A-D. So they have a limited number of patterns right now, but they're basically specializing in larger size plus size. And I think that their sort of like average size is more like a size like 26 or 28. Like that seems to be like their core size, and they're going out from that. Cashmerette core size is like about a 20, and we're going out from that. So that's another example. And they are applier. So they have like a lower ratio between waist and hip for sure. So that's something that you can look at. So if you can, I really recommend trying to find patterns that are closer to you, because again, it sort of avoids that constant doesn't fit me and so on. But unfortunately, not everyone's in a position yet to do that. We are expanding all of our patterns up to a size 32. But if you are bigger than that, certainly contact us and we can kind of help you with the resources of what you can do. Sometimes if you look at finished garment measurements, especially if you're only bigger in the hip, you can fit in a bigger one. What was the thing we had the other day? I was talking to someone about, oh, now I don't remember. We were looking at one of our patterns, and we were thinking like, what size hip could fit in this? Oh, I know what it was. We were expanding the size 32 onto other patterns, and we were realizing that someone who was like a 42 could fit in the hips of it. So it's always worth having a look at that as well. And then the final thing I wanted to say in terms of setting yourself up for success is about learning how to adjust patterns. Now, there's twofold here. So there's what I just talked about, which is making things bigger. But there's also, really the groundbreaking thing that you're going to learn if you haven't done this before is how to alter the pattern so that they fit your body. So the most basic one is grading between sizes. Almost all women have to grade between sizes. Okay, so we get people constantly saying like, oh, my bust is in a size, I'm making this up, my bust is in a size 26, but my waist is in a 32. I don't know what to do. And the answer is you're going to grade between sizes, because very, very few people are like 18, 18, 18. It is funny, actually. A lot of our super fans are a straight size through all of them. I've noticed that it's quite common, actually. They're like I feel like it's made for me. And it's like, well, it kind of is because you fit in a one straight size. However, I mean straight size, like same one for bust, waist, hip, not straight size. But grading between sizes is actually not difficult at all. So we have a large amount of information on our website. Carrie will put it up, where not only do we talk about the theory of how it works, but we also give you exactly what to do for every single one of our patterns. And what you're basically doing is joining the dots. So you're dotting like an 18 at the bust, and then a 24 at the waist, and then, I don't know, a 16 at the hip, and you're joining them together. And I would say that if you only learn one thing, learn how to do that. Because if what you've been doing is the same as when you buy clothes, which is just buying it to accommodate the biggest bit of you, it won't fit well, right? And you will look much better if you wear something that's like fitted-ish. I don't mean tight, but fitted rather than to your biggest point. So there's that. The second thing is, if you're not using Cashmerette Patterns, learning a full bust adjustment could be a huge game changer, because most patterns are designed for a B or C, and if you're bigger than that, then you are really going to have to do a full bust adjustment. So I have 2 classes. I have Fitting for Curves, which is my online workshop that covers bust, but it also covers like shoulders, arms, back, waist, and so on. And then I also have a class on Blueprint that's specifically on FBAs. So there are 2 things that, if you want to learn how to do an FBA, those are the things I'd recommend. The other thing, and I just saw it pop up in the chat, is altering length. So if you are petite and shorter, or if you're super tall, learning how to shorten or lengthen patterns is also going to be really helpful. It's actually quite easy. You basically just need to, for our patterns, not everybody's, we have lines that say lengthen and shorten on almost all the pieces. And you cut there, and you basically either spread them apart and fill in the paper, or you overlap them. And then you do have to like redraw the side seams a little bit, the seams on either side of that. But it's actually a fairly basic approach. And again, that's the kind of thing that's a game changer, right? Like if everything you've ever bought, if all the clothes you've ever bought were too short or too long for you, suddenly having the exact right length every time, that is a game changer. And that's exactly the kind of thing that can lead you to feel much better about your body, when you no longer like, I'm too short for everything. No, the clothes were too long for you. Now we're going to make the clothes the same length for you. We're all okay. So, do we have any questions on this topic, Carrie?
One question was, can you talk a little bit about the Curvy Sewing Collective and what that is?
Mm-hmm. So the Curvy Sewing Collective is a website that I set up with a few other plus size sewing people. I don't even know how many years ago now. Like, was it before Cashmerette? It was before Cashmerette.
Yeah.
8 years ago, 7 years ago. And basically we did it because there was very little representation of curvy women in the sewing blogosphere, which at the time was huge. It was actually bigger than it is now. Like blogs were like on fire then. And also like there wasn't a central place you could get information on things like full bust adjustments, pattern reviews of patterns that were bigger. And in fact, the Curvy Sewing Collective has been fundamental in changing, I think, the landscape of sewing for plus size women, especially online. I think, we have done big sizing surveys that were one of the things that kicked off a lot of brands going bigger. We were able to put pressure on various companies in a nice way, but to do it. And it was also something, honestly, that prompted me to do Cashmerette, because the first day we got 10,000 people going on the website, the first day. And the only reason anyone knew it existed is because the like 6 of us who were the initial editors posted it on our Instagrams. They weren't big. I think I had like 2,000 people following me, but it was immediately massively successful. And one of the things that's really nice about it is that it's really diverse. Well, okay, sorry, I got to back myself up there. It could be more diverse. We have tried really hard with editors, believe me. We have asked a lot of older women and women of color to join, and they haven't necessarily always wanted to do it. But when I say it's diverse, it's not just me, right? It's not just me and my style. It's lots of people. So if you like Lagen look, which is the like really floaty like look, there are women on the Curvy Sewing Collective showing you reviews of that. If you really like, like crafty things, if you really like close fitting things, like there is so much variety there. And there's also a really popular Facebook community group. So it's not like the Facebook page, it's the Facebook community group. You have to answer a few questions to get in, just to make sure you're not a troll, because we, believe me, get many of those. And that is also amazing because there's like constantly people posting. I mean, it's super active. If you want to have, if you're asking people for an idea for a pattern, if you want to show something you've made and ask for alterations, if you just want a little bit of feeling good about yourself, it's a great place to go. If you love the shirt you made and you put it up there and you say, hey guys, look, I made this Cashmerette Montrose top and I love it, you will guaranteed get about 100 people giving you like emojis and doing gifs and telling you look fantastic. So if you're having a hard day, it's a good thing to do. And it's also a very safe space. Like we moderate it very aggressively. So for instance, you're never allowed to tell someone they're wearing the wrong bra, as an example. Like that's never an acceptable comment. And people cannot be negative about their bodies or someone else's body. So if someone posts something like, I hate my stomach and blah, 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 we contact them and we ask them to change it. And if they won't change it, we take it down. So it's very curated. So that's the Curvy Sewing Collective Facebook group. We also have one for Cashmerette. It's smaller and it's only about Cashmerette, but that's the Cashmerette Patterns Facebook community group. So if you Google, if you type in on Facebook, like Curvy Sewing Collective community or Cashmerette community, you will find it. So those are really nice places as well. Anyone can contribute to the Curvy Sewing Collective, the actual blog, and we always are looking for more people. So if you're interested in like reviewing, we get free offers of patterns all the time. So if you're interested in reviewing, you know, you might get a free pattern. And there's also one thing that's really popular and it's been cool called same pattern, different bodies that we do, where we have 3 or 4 people all make the same pattern and you can see what it looks like on a variety of bodies and on body shapes. So that's another thing. Okay, we're going to go to the next point. And the next point is sewing for weight fluctuations. So this is something that really stops a lot of people wanting to sew. Understandably, because they say either, well, my weight goes up and down all the time, and until it's stable, I don't want to, you know, I don't want to sew for myself because I don't want to waste my fabric, right? Or I don't want to waste my time. Or potentially, you know, they're intentionally gaining or losing weight. Who knows? Another side point is to never comment on people when they've gained or lost weight. I lost weight during pregnancy and I felt horrific. I didn't want anyone to comment positively on that because I felt bad, right? You never know what's going on with people. So just a side point. But there are many of us whose weight fluctuates. My weight fluctuates all the time. I don't weigh myself, so I don't know the number, but it's very obvious that my weight fluctuates all the time. So there are some things you can do that are going to maximize the chances that what you sew works. First one, sewing with knits. It's basic, but it's true. So when you sew with knits, the amazing thing is they stretch. And that means, for instance, that, you know, a Concord t-shirt, say you make, you could probably be plus or minus like 3 or 4 inches and it's still going to fit you. If you're scared of sewing with knits, I don't know why. It's interesting. I know some people who started sewing with knits and then they hear later on that they're meant to be scary and they're like, what do you mean? Why are they scary? It's just this thing that's gone around for some reason that sewing with knits is scary. It really isn't. You can sew them on a regular sewing machine, use a zigzag stitch, try and use like better quality knits. That helps. Like try not to use like super slinky ones, like super poly shiny ones, but something like art gallery fabric knits, for instance, is lovely. It's like beefy. Also Ponte, if you're scared of sewing with knits, sew with Ponte. It is fabulous. I love Ponte. It's like a thicker, more comfortable, heavier knit. It's really excellent for things like our Rivermont dress is made for a Ponte. And then you can also use Ponte for a lot of like jersey things as long as it has enough stretch, but it's very easy to sew with Ponte. So knits are a great one. Another one is wraps, right? So for instance, the Appleton dress, I think that say I took a size 18 Appleton dress, I think feasibly it could look great on like a size 14 to probably a size 22. And you wouldn't even know it wasn't in the right size. And that's because the wraps around you, right? So if the wrap is like this, or if the wrap is like this, you can barely tell the difference. In the shoulders, yes. But when your weight fluctuates, your shoulders do not tend to fluctuate. So for instance, I'm fundamentally a size 18 in Cashmerette, but other bits of me go up to like a 22, but I'm still sort of an 18 because like my shoulders, just my structure is a size 18, right? But when I wear a wrap, it doesn't matter because it's going to fit me until I have maybe, gone up like 6 sizes, which I tend not to do. So there are all kinds of wraps. There's our Appleton, but there are also like loads of wrap skirts. There are wrap tops. So that's another thing to think about. Another one is adding elastic. So for instance, we just came out with the Calder pants and they have a elastic back waistband. It's amazing because you can go up and down inches and inches and you would be totally fine. They would still fit you through the waist and they're fairly roomy through the hip too. So think about things that have some elastic. And the other thing is sewing with bigger seam allowances. So this is a more laborious one, but if you know that your weight tends to go up and down and you're making something precious, especially in a woven, instead of using like the 1/2 inch seam allowance, make it an inch or even an 1.5 inches. And this is actually something that most couture clothing has, because if you're making or buying incredibly expensive clothing, you want it to always fit you, right? And if you have a big seam allowance, what it means is you can take it out at a later date. Now it's laborious. You're going to have to seam rip the entire thing and re-sew it, but there's that. I've seen a few people are chatting about using precious fabric, and this is another interesting one. It's so tempting, and trust me, I do it. Carrie will laugh. There are things in the stash that I have had for years, and I'm like, oh, I love doing this, right? But I love this fabric, and then I like don't actually use it. It's like, ugh. But anyway, it's really worth trying it, unless you think there's some radical reason that you shouldn't. What I always recommend is use the tried and true pattern. So for instance, if you know the Springfield top fits you like really well and you wear them all the time, then instead of using your super fancy fabric to make a super fancy thing you're never going to wear, use it to make a Springfield, because you know it fits you and you're going to feel great about it. Yes, I would not use a special fabric, like first time especially, on a new pattern and you know that you're probably not going to fit in it soon. But using it for something that the pattern you already know fits you is huge. Just on one point on this, on seam allowances, I saw someone mention couture not using seam allowances on the patterns. So couture patterns don't come with a seam allowance, you add a seam allowance, right? So they come with the cut line. So my point is that couture people add often like 1 inch or 1.5 inches on the edge of each piece, and then they sew it together at the sew lines. And in some cases, couturiers will keep that seam allowance inside the garment to allow them to let it out. So they don't come with seam allowances, you add, but often people add a lot. Okay. So are there any questions on that before I go to my last point?
One quick question was, do we plan to make Calder available in a print version? And we have it. It's ready to go. We just can't ship yet.
Yeah, so you can order the Calder print pattern now. You will get the PDF free immediately because we wanted people to have access to it. And then as soon as we can get back into the studio, we will do it. Not only do we have the issue with the pandemic, we also have the issue that the street that I live on in the studio was under 6 feet of water 36 hours ago. The power went to my building. The road collapsed. It flooded many studios, but luckily we're on the 2nd floor. So we were okay, but it has limited our ability to get in there. Okay, so I want to go to my final point. And my final point is about getting expert help. So first of all you guys are on this webinar, so good job. You're getting some expert help. Well, if I could be called an expert, it is quite funny. I'm often like, get the imposter syndrome, like, what do I know about this? And I just have to remind myself, like, more than you think. But there are a bunch of places that you can get expert help on curvy sewing. One, us. So there's our blog. We have tons of stuff on the blog, and we're trying to work actually on like making it more discoverable, because quite often people are like, oh, I had no idea that you had guidance on that on the blog. So we're actually working on that right now. But it's always worth searching our blog. If you were like, oh, I need to do a narrow shoulder adjustment, how do I do that? We have it on the blog. We do have a headline that says tutorials, I think, right? You can click there and see them, but actually not all of them are linked there. We also have our online classes. So, these are where, if you like me talking right now, it's a little bit more formal, although I do make jokes sometimes. But you can get them, and we have 5 classes on lots of different topics. And I also have the blueprint class. So that's another one. Then we have the community group on Facebook that I mentioned. I already mentioned the Curvy Sewing Collective, and then also Blueprint has online classes. Carrie provided the link, but I don't know if it's still on, but they've been doing like a free period where you can watch anything for free. And there's my class, but there's also tons of other people's classes. There aren't that many specific plus size ones. There's a couple, but you can learn a lot. The final thing I wanted to mention is that, you know, we at Cashmerette, you know, we're very dedicated to our community. I mean, obviously you guys are dedicated to us, we're dedicated to you. You can always contact us. The community group is a great place to go because usually someone's awake at some point in the day, right? And people can give you feedback really quickly. But we're also happy to give you feedback specifically. So if you email us at hello@cashmerette.com, I think we'll get back to you in about 2 business days. It's often faster. Bear in mind, we're in America, so on American time, East Coast American time. But we will help you. So if you're struggling with something, you know, it's always a good idea to look on our website first, because often a lot of the information that people are asking for is in fact on the website. But we're happy to help you because, you know, it's important to us that you have a good experience with a Cashmerette product. You know, it's rare that someone has a terrible experience, and you know what? We refund them because we want people to be happy. But usually there's an answer, right? And there are certain things that come up again and again and again where we're like, oh, that pattern piece is upside down, or oh, that didn't print at the right size. So we're often able to help. There is also a blog post that I have called Why Doesn't It Fit? A Checklist. And it's actually a list of, I can't remember if it's 10 things. I think maybe it's 10 things. 10 things that you can go down when you make something that doesn't fit you to kind of figure out why. So we've come to the end of the hour. I hope that you found this interesting. You know, it sort of cobbled together various thoughts that I've had over the years. You know, Jenny Rushmore, do not always have a positive body image. I mean, Carrie can attest to that. There are days when I really don't. And I think, you know, it's very hard to always feel great about yourself. There is so much pressure, and there is so much, like, from the media, from like friends and family, from the community around you, to look in a certain way. It would be impossible to like every single day be like, woohoo, I feel on top of the world. But learning to sew and take these things on has radically improved where I am. I can tell you now that I look at photos of myself and I go, oh, you look nice. And in the past, I never did that. I just criticized myself, right? Always. I never smiled. That's another thing. Smile in photos. It makes a massive difference, right? Like if every photo you're in, like, then it's not a good photo, right? If you're like, at the very least, someone smiles, right? You see someone doing a silly smile, you smile back. And so, you know, I'm not going to claim that like I have the magic solution to everything, but these things have made a difference to me, and I hope they are to you. So that's our webinar. Next week, we are doing one specifically, and it may not apply to everyone on this call, depending, but we're going to talk about beginner sewing. So if you're new or you're getting into it. So also if you know somebody who maybe is not in our world so much yet, but wants to learn to sew, that would be good. And then we have then we're just doing one on beginners, and then we're moving forward. We are keeping these free because I just think at this moment in time, you know, we all need it, and it's a nice thing, you know, that we can all come together. But if you do want to support us, because I can tell you that it is hard on our business right now because we can't do any wholesale sales at all, and we can't sell our physical patterns, you know, anything helps. So if there's been a pattern you had your eye on, if you've been thinking about taking an online class, you know, now is a fabulous time to do it. But in the meantime, you know, we're going to keep these free. We're going to keep on doing content. And if you have any ideas or any more questions, you know, feel free to email us at hello@cashmerette. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you next week.